If I were going to start a podcast tomorrow, it'd be a video podcast. Your corporate video on YouTube's getting nothing, right? Your video podcast on YouTube could do something completely different, right?
Hi there, welcome to the HealthTech Marketing Show. I'm your host, Adam Chirinas, and I'd like to welcome you to today's episode. I want to give a big thank you to you for listening. And if this is your first time listening and you'd like to subscribe, you can find us on YouTube and you can find us on any of the audio podcast applications like Spotify and Apple and all those kind of guys. And thank you to our longtime sponsors from HIMSS. We're always grateful to you for the support that you've given to us over the years with this show. Today's episode is going to get very meta. So this is a podcast about podcasts. We're going to go really deep into what it takes to create a successful podcast. And I've got a really great guest to help me with this, the wonderful Carol Flagg, who heads up Health IT Answers and Healthcare Now radio networks. And she's been doing this for, oh my goodness, since I think 2009. So what Carol has to share is really worth listening to. So with that, let's get on with the show. Carol, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to see you. It was great meeting you at the Sway conference. And I think you got a big award, didn't you?
I did. I was completely floored to get a Sway Award, to be honest with you. And if I had known, I would have gone to the restroom 2 minutes beforehand, fixed my hair and tucked my shirt in, but I did not. So, videos forever. But anyway, I did. I got a community member award that co-shared with Amy Oliver, who I don't know if you know her. She's absolutely fantastic. She is way more of a rock star than I am. That's for sure. I think it was just like longevity, the Academy Awards, how they you've been in the industry for 70 years and they finally give you oh, thank you, Depreciation Academy Award. That's kind of what I think it was like. So,
well, you and Amy are two wonderful people to get that award. And tell us about you and tell us about your organization, what you do.
Yeah. So I'm a career communications media salesperson, cut my teeth in the newspaper industry and relocated back to family in 2008, which everybody remembers in retrospect was the start of the deep recession, some say depression, that went across the US and across the world. But my sort of healthcare origin story started on a cocktail napkin at a bar in the Mandalay Bay with my best friend, Roberta Mullen. In 2009, we had gone there. We'd been friends for 20 years before we were business partners. And we were in Vegas in March of 2009. We were the only people in Vegas, March 2009. There were billboards up there saying, buy one condo, get two free. It was just kind of a weird situation. Very strange. And I'd left the newspaper industry and starting to do some consulting, and Roberta was doing medical consulting. And everybody recalls in February of 2009, the passing of ARA, the American Recovery Act. And part of that piece of legislation was the HealthTech Act. So our journey started really with creating a media site called HealthTech Answers that was really dedicated to educating providers on how to participate in the EHR incentive program, earn their meaningful use dollars by adopting certified EHR technology, blah, 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 blah. Way water under the bridge at this point.
But what a smart idea. I mean, that really that's real foresight to sort of see that need. And I remember that. I mean, that's
HealthTech Answers. Yeah. Everybody still remembers HealthTech Answers, right? Which is now Health IT Answers because, of course, the metamorphosis of the industry, right? And in 2009, for better or worse, we somehow just decided that we were going to get into internet radio, which at that time was starting to really become an interesting sort of content play, not so much in healthcare and certainly not so much in healthcare IT, but of course in other industries. It's fairly relative, low cost investment, high bandwidth, lots of time and effort. And then podcasts in 2016, everybody remembers that, the version of the Apple that came out with a podcast icon that really just changed everything from a content standpoint in the B2B space. And, obviously you and I we're talking about the B2B space and the healthcare space and maybe even specifically the health tech and health IT space. Yeah. So that was our origin.
Pause on that a sec, because podcasts, I think podcasts have been around a while before then, probably as MP3s.
They were. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to like Napster, it's like crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. I know. How many guests could you say who could throw that out at you? Right?
Yeah.
Napster. What the hell is that?
And then I remember everybody said, oh, podcast is going to be the future of everything. And then it wasn't. And so everybody said, oh, podcasts are dead. And then it wasn't. Then they weren't. And it's just they've slowly but surely sort of the podcasting has grown and it's exploded in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, it feels like it probably reached I think it reached a tipping point, with the last election, I think when Trump went on Rogan and then Kamala realized that she needed to be on Rogan and the other shows like that, it was everybody like, oh, I guess this is the thing,
Yeah, I think this, interesting that you use that word tipping point, because I think that, first of all, it's a great setup for, I think, what I would like to perhaps talk about with you and your audience today, because I think that podcasts, which have been around for a long time, have had these tipping points along the way. Certainly, the addition of the podcast icon on the Apple phone, and let's be real, Apple still has 50-60% market share of podcast listeners, although YouTube is making a hard play here. We can talk about that later if you'd like. And then COVID hit, which was another tipping point, because now people not only had time to listen to podcasts because they're working virtually at home and maybe not going to work, that daily commute, but they had time to start podcasts, right? And it seemed like everybody was starting a podcast. A lot of companies that you and I know and dearly love, got into the podcast arena. Maybe they were converting webinars, or it wasn't great. It was good content, I guess, thematically, but production wise, not great. But it almost didn't matter because everybody was doing a podcast. Everybody got into that content creation. Then, COVID, of course, waned, but then you set the election of 2024, sort of put that back on the map, as did a lot of these big movie stars, not just doing their own podcast show, but doing Audible books and, audio, right? And the tipping point right now, a lot of it really jump-started by YouTube's entry into the podcast playing field, is video podcasting. In fact, the term vodcast, which started like a couple of years ago, like vodcast.
Oh, I remember vlogs. Do you remember vlogs?
Vodcast. Vodcast is an old term. Vodcast, that's an old term now. That needs to be sunsetted. The impact that Google has had on the podcasting world is video podcasts. That is this tipping point that I think we're experiencing right now.
So just double click on that a minute. So when you talk about a video podcast, do you mean, so like with this podcast, we're recording audio and video. I'll take this and I will distribute it, the audio through Anchor. That'll go out Spotify, Apple, blah, 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 Stitcher, all those guys. And then I'll take the video edited and that'll go up on the Health Launchpad YouTube channel. And, we market that.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, right?
Well, I think that was the genesis of what I'm talking about, right? A couple of years ago, people were like, or 3 or 4 years ago, really, why not record? People were recording anyway using a video platform and converting the MP4 to MP3 so that, it's just a natural extension to say, well, let's not do nothing with this video content, right? Why waste it? We might as well repurpose it. But it's different today. So, video podcasting, again, sort of driven by YouTube's entry into this, is really this issue of your RSS feed. Of course, the entire world of podcasting is driven by your unique RSS feed that you use for it. And Apple, Spotify, Podbean, but let's talk about Apple and Spotify and YouTube, of course, are now, as part of that RSS feed, your video podcast can be on those platforms as a video podcast. So it's not about separating them, just saying, oh, videos for YouTube, right? Today in Apple, you can put your video podcast with the video as an RSS feed into Apple. and into Spotify and into Podbean. So you could actually have, if you wanted, you could actually have two different RSS feeds. Again, driven by, you could have your audio RSS feed with your show name, and then you could differentiate the video as a separate RSS feed, saying this is our video podcast, or these are our outtakes from our video podcast, whatever you want to do, right? But they are really integrating. They're really integrating versus YouTube's video, Apple's audio.
So just to summarize this a bit. So I'm thinking about this as like, I realize I may be missing a trick here because I am. No, clearly, because we've got the RSS feed for the audio podcast. Yeah. We're on YouTube. But what I'm not doing is taking the video, the MP4 of this podcast, and then distributing that out through the channels. So publishing it that way. Is that what you're saying I should be doing?
Well, I think where it really starts with, if for anybody who wants to do video podcasting, best of both worlds, right? So YouTube is not really like Anchor. You said you use Anchor,
Right.
Anchor, Libsyn, Riverside, these basically podcast production studios. YouTube will just accept the RSS feed, right? Where these podcast production companies are going is they're saying, create your podcast here. That is video and audio, and that is your RSS feed that you can then put into YouTube and Apple and Spotify and blah, 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 right? If the podcast platform doesn't accept video, it'll still pick up the RSS.
Right.
It won't play the video, right?
Got it. Okay, got it. So I got us really granular in a nanosecond. So let's just back up. So you know what? We didn't talk about your business. So tell us about your organization does and all of the podcasts and what you guys do.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. So Answers Media Network is a health IT news site, formerly HealthTech Answers. And that Healthcare Radio is first and foremost an internet radio station that streams 24/7 around the US and around the world, and podcast channel. So naturally, all of our radio shows in their lifespan go on demand as podcasts. And then we have another 25 podcast only shows that we syndicate. But at the end of the day, mostly on the Health IT Answers site, maybe 85% of our content and most of the content on our Healthcare Radio and podcast channel is syndicated content. So we may help produce a show, but at the end of the day, we don't own the show. We are there as a syndication and distribution partner for a radio show or syndication of an article on Health IT Answers, which is when people think of syndication, that's really what they're thinking about. Oh yeah, you republished my article and then made a note that you republished it. So on the audio side of things, on our radio station and podcast channel, we really are, again, even if we help produce a show, we really are that syndication and distribution partner for that company's show.
So you're almost like your local TV station where you do make content. So you make podcasts, you have stuff streaming, but you also take content from other companies and you distribute that across your network.
Yeah. And on the radio side, that's basically our revenue model, right?
Right. Yeah. And, how many podcast shows do you produce and versus syndicate?
Yeah. And when we say produce on the podcast side of it, we're editing. We might give somebody's launch, like we just had a company just came to us and they wanted help with ideation and best practices for graphics and scripting and music and all those kinds of things. And so there's a charge to do that, but we help with that process so they can launch their show, right? Right. But once it's launched, then it's part of our podcast network and it's distributed under the Healthcare Radio umbrella. Whether we help show launch or your show, it's already in distribution, we're going to come in and syndicate it. We're going to release your show after you've released it under the Healthcare Radio umbrella. So those 25 plus podcast only shows, that's mostly, 85% of what we do is that relationship. It already exists. And then what we're doing is just saying, hey, you need more plays and downloads are the same thing. You need more engagement. You need more exposure. We're going to do that not only through distributing that show under the Healthcare Radio umbrella, and now you've got the benefit of all these other great shows that you're with, but, we're going to market it, promote it. We write articles, we push it out on LinkedIn and all those sorts of fun.
And what are some of the shows that people listening to this podcast would have heard of?
The radio side of our network because it is internet radio, we get 40,000 listeners a month across 16 radio shows. And these people, some of them have become household names. Dr. Nick Vanderheyden, right? He's the incrementalist, right? Fred Goldstein and Greg Masters of Pop Health Week, Gil Bash, Health Unabashed.
Cool.
Nat Fisher, Healthcare du Jour, Justin Barnes is just in, right? So these are names that are really familiar and synonymous with their radio shows and the content that's been curated over the many years. On the podcast side of things, a lot of those shows, they're straight up, for the most part, company podcasts, right? Obviously, the goal, just like the goal of any show, is to speak to their particular audience. So the show Tell Me Where It Hurts, with it being IT, with Dr. Jay Anders, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Medicom Systems. His podcast has won awards. They've had senior leadership from the White House, former ONC IT coordinator, Mickey Tripathi. They won an award for that. So there are shows in the podcast side that do have some name recognition, and certainly all the podcasts, because of the syndication relationship, more name recognition than when they started with us, right? Or before they started with us. But when you talk about really getting your name out there and being that household name, it takes a lot. And it doesn't maybe take a radio show on a network, but even just as a podcast show and a host, you have to be doing more than just using Anchor or Libsyn or Blueberry to create an RSS feed to release your podcast into Apple and Spotify and whatnot. I mean, the typical response that we get, or I get, when I'm talking to a company is, well, what's your best episode? How many plays did you get? Well, my best episode got like 60 plays. And then that's not uncommon. And that doesn't mean, doesn't mean it's a bad show. It doesn't mean the content's not worthwhile. It's just that it's, as we've talked about, these, basically tipping points in the podcasting world and now the video podcasting world, it just gets harder and harder to get in front of the.
Yeah. And that's, I think, for niche podcasts like this one, where it's like, this podcast is created explicitly for a very small audience. It is basically for healthcare technology, marketing and sales people,
right?
Primarily for marketing people. And so I don't expect that we'll get, more than 100 listens per episode. And that's just fine, because the community that we're creating this for is a relatively small niche. But anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about, you said that a lot of the podcasts that you're distributing are created by companies. And anybody who spent 5 minutes thinking about this knows that there's a lot of work that goes into creating a good podcast. Is it worth it? Why should a healthcare technology firm think that it's worth spending the time to launch a podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that today, more than anything, it's really worth the effort. But part of that effort, I think, because of the tools that are available today, it does make it easier for content creators on the business side, these marketing teams who we all know their dollars are stretched, their time is stretched and all of that, to create an engaging video podcasting. We're a syndicator, but if it were just me and I'm starting tomorrow, I'm doing a video podcast, right? Because for $24 a month, I can have an AI tool do 90% of the work for me, right? They can take out the ums, they can do the audio, they can create snippets, they can create social engagement pieces, right? I mean, all at a touch of a button for basically that $25 a month, right? I can have that AI, the beauty of AI, do that work for me, do the transcription, say, AI, pull 5 quotes from my episode. I mean, you probably do that all the time.
Put the closed captions on this.
Everything. They do everything. The volume, the audio. If your guest has a bad mic, no problem. Forget about it. Well, they'll adjust it, right? So, the advent of AI and AI tools and generative AI makes it as easy as it's ever been to take basically, let's just say a 30-minute episode of a video podcast and create everything that you need for socialization, create outtakes, create, hey, pull out all the hacks, the tips, right? Here's my list of hacks for that episode, right? Give me the quotes, give me everything. So it's very quick to do that these days. And, set up an RSS feed and Buzzsprout or
this is why it's so easy to do it. So why do it? I can tell you why I do this, but I want to know why you think, why the companies, the ones that are sticking at it.
Yeah.
Because not everybody sticks at it. The companies that are sticking at it.
Yeah.
Why are they doing it?
Well, it's really the same kind of effort that they put into doing webinars or white papers or case studies or videos or all that kind of thing. It's a piece of valuable content that can be put on YouTube and create tremendous SEO value, right? Everybody knows that, right? If you put your video podcast or just even your podcast on YouTube, there are things you need to do, obviously, from an SEO standpoint. But the SEO part of that is even more important than any plays that you get, right? It's just the SEO germane to having a piece of content on YouTube. The fact that you can create many pieces of content from one episode. I mean, content is king. I was talking with somebody the other day on my show and she said it beautifully, and I'll quote Callie Drakey from Chime, content is king, but syndication is queen, right? And so you want to create all of this content, the more content that you can create, because people blog articles, people are email newsletters, all that kind of engagement is declining, right? And so we have to, as content creators, we have to create content that will inspire people, will teach people, will give them real value. And the storytelling that you can do in a video and a video podcast is light years of what you can accomplish in a blog article. All of that said, though, it still has to be a good show. I mean, these AI tools help, generative AI tools help, the SEO value of being on YouTube, the fact that you're promoting these on LinkedIn and social, and you've got snippets here and sound bites there, but it has to be good content to create all those various pieces.
I think what we're doing with this podcast actually is proof of what you're saying. So when I first started Health Launchpad a little over 5 years ago, I made a commitment to that I wanted to get found through SEO.
Right.
And so I had an intentional strategy of writing blog posts that were thoughtful and, had to be well written, but written so that if somebody's Googling something related to ABM and healthcare, they're going to find Health Launchpad. And that I felt was reaching diminishing returns. But fortunately, I'd started the podcast and our content strategy. Now, essentially, the podcast is at the center of the strategy. And so what I'm going to do with this episode is, obviously, I'm going to distribute it through the channels that you talked about, but I'm going to create 2 blog posts. I'm going to create a blog post about the episode and then a long form blog post, a how-to type article. And I'm distributing that across, obviously, I'm going to promote it on LinkedIn. I've got an email newsletter with close to 4,000 subscribers. I've got 2 LinkedIn newsletters, one for the podcast, one for and another one. And so across all of those, we're reaching about 10,000 people just through our own channels. But the other reason I'm doing this is that I think there's a lot of people seeing traffic, SEO driven traffic declining. That is, I think, is accelerating, if anything. But what we're starting to see is more traffic coming from the generative AI tools. And one of the tips I got earlier about it is that you need to expand your channels. And so you need to be in audio and video channels with your content. And what was kind of cool is that now basically my own chat GPT called Webless AI on the website. And now if you search what's best practice for LinkedIn for healthcare, you're going to get an article that will come up that's generated by the generative AI tools, but it'll also curate the content. And the podcasts and the videos, articles are coming up in that quite prominently. And so I can see it working. It's really interesting seeing that.
It is interesting. And also really back to a point that you've made a couple of different times related to your podcast, but it's actually really good advice, I think, for anybody who is thinking of starting one, is be niche. Right? You have a niche audience and your niche audience is marketing and content people. So we're always looking for new content, right? And so it's the perfect fit because people are marketing types like us, right? We're interested in exploring things like podcasts and video podcasting and how that can help from a content standpoint, because part of what we do is to have to create content. But if you come to me and say, hey, Carol, I want to start a podcast show and I want the audience to be CIOs. And I go, okay, there's already several well-known podcasts out there that are geared towards the CIO, right? Been around for a long time. They've already got market share. They've got a footprint, go check out Bill Russell's show. But maybe that's not really the overall market. Maybe what you're trying to do is, I'd rather look and educate and provide something super compelling for the people underneath the CIO, right? IT manager, RT who needs some education and support and some help, right? I think that the smaller that audience can be versus like, oh yeah, I want to reach every C-level person in a hospital, it's too broad. I think the more niche you can be, the easier it's going to be to strategize about what your show is going to be about. Because if you're trying to reach that persona, you talked about it, and that's one of the ABCs of starting a show is like, who is your persona? Who are you creating this content for? That is like one of the first steps that you're going to do is, what is the show about and who am I talking to? The more narrow that can be, you'll be surprised by the content that you can create, the list of subjects that you can create that are a little bit deeper dive because it is more detailed. I do painting on the side. I'm a crappy painter, but when I first started painting, I was like, oh my God, there's 50 million colors out here. I want them all. And finally I got to the point where no, limited color palette with 3 colors, I can create 10. Right? But really narrowing that focus of the show and really defining who that persona is. And that persona just can't be a general, again, the CIO, that ship has sailed, right? Be hyper focused, then it becomes what you're talking about. It becomes a quality versus quantity and way easier to get any sort of SEO value on that because now you're talking about topics and keywords that are really sort of honed in on the algorithms that things like AI generated content and Google likes and, that SEO value.
So you've described how you should go about developing your strategy for your podcast. What goes into creating a great podcast though? What are the qualities that make a podcast that is must not miss? I can't miss those episodes. Everybody's got their shortlist. So what goes into making a great podcast series?
Yeah. Well, for me, even along with that topic, it comes with an engaging host. You're a very engaging host, right? You have to have that host leading the way, right? They become the persona for your show. You have to think about talk radio and talk TV shows. You have to think about, I'm personally not a Howard Stern fan, but he has a persona, right? Super smart, super funny, has had a following for years. And because he is engaging in his own ways, so is Rogan, right? And so no matter what your style is, I'm not saying you have to be kind of loud and blah, 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 or anything like that. It's not, the loudest voice doesn't always get the most attention, but you do have to be engaging. You do have to have a personality. You do have to be a storyteller. If you have guests on your show, you have to be that kind of person that is curious and is going to draw out. Not every guest is super engaging. And so you have to be willing to pivot and draw that out of that guest. You have to be able to segue. You have to be a good journalist, be a good TV host. Those are the things that I think start with the podcast because that's what people remember is I got to tune into that because of that host, the kind of guests they have on. Maybe they start their show with something really snappy and clever for the first 5 minutes. They're going on their rant, or maybe they're giving at the end, here are 10 hacks for this episode. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be gimmicky, but it's okay to have a little bit of that, right? Something that is memorable versus, there's a lot of shows out there that, especially, our arena and the health IT arena, where it's pretty much the same format. The host, it's kind of like our format, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's guys oh, wait. But you did make it clear, you're going to be providing this value. We're talking about something not in theory. I tuned in the other day, maybe it was last week, to the episode you did with Mark and Leah. And it was very focused and a very deep dive, and people think, oh, you can't really do that in a podcast or a video podcast. I'm like, yes, you can. Yep. And in fact, the more you do, the better that is without going over, an hour or 30 minutes or something like that.
There's something that we stress with this. It's a how-to. Now, it's very hard for you to process a how-to by listening. That's not how we learn. We learn by reading and, reviewing something repeatedly. And so, as I've mentioned several times, in the show notes, there's a link to a long form article, which is a how to. And what I do is I use Claude to help me do that. I don't get Claude to write the article for me,
Right.
but I will get Claude to make sure I don't miss stuff, because I will, when I listen to the recording, I am going to miss stuff. And so Claude actually is really good, or ChatGPT, or any of them are very good at making sure it takes all of the information and turns it into something that's actionable. And that's what we hope this achieves. So, we hope you listen to the whole show, but if you only listen to 5 or 10 minutes, you may then go and sort of read the article and take action on that, or share that with your colleagues. And that for us is like, then great, then we've done our job. But that's what we're trying to get done with this.
Hey, I've taken links to podcasts and I use Copilot, I may use others, but, thrown in Copilot and said, give me the list of the highlights. And like, okay, got it. I listened and I tuned in, but maybe I wanted to go back to something, or, I can get specific, obviously, that's the thing. At the end of the day, if you're providing an engaging host and providing valuable content, right? You can't talk about having a good show becoming a great show without a good host, and the content has to be valuable.
And so we talked a bit earlier on about how to promote and get your podcast distributed. Are there any other tips that you want to share on how to market your podcast?
Yeah, I do think that even if you don't get into video podcasting, YouTube will take your RSS feed for your podcast. You submit it just like you submit your RSS feed to Apple or any other platform. And on the phone, to be honest with you, on your smartphone, on the iPhone, if you go to YouTube and you click on the podcast link for the show, the experience is the same. It's like, play the next episode, play the previous episode. It looks the same. The experience is the same as it would be in YouTube. And in fact, on Apple or Spotify. And in fact, there's information out there, research that suggests that we're closely getting to the point where there'll be more podcast listeners on YouTube, video podcast listeners on YouTube than the other platforms. No surprise.
I think we might be at that. This podcast may be at that point. It's certainly, I was surprised about 6 months ago that we get as many views as the podcast or listens to the podcast on YouTube as we do through the other channels. It may actually have exceeded it now.
Yeah.
The other thing is, we create reels, and we'll use the reels on LinkedIn. Yes.
That's a great example.
And we put the reels on YouTube, and one of them the other day had like 1,500 views, and I still don't really know why, because I want to replicate that. It's just like there wasn't anything particular about it. I thought that was great.
That's the thing about doing a video podcast and doing those segments and putting them up on YouTube. You have to understand, which you obviously do because you guys are, deep into SEO, right? There are things you have to do in order for the YouTube algorithm to reward you. But when it does start rewarding you, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Everybody has an experience where they have an episode that's an outlier and they're going, why did that episode do so well? And they want to recreate that outlier experience to try to make it not an outlier. But it does become that understanding of what you're putting out there. Obviously, LinkedIn is phenomenal as a place to share, like you said, snippets and reels and a teaser of an episode. The video, of course, is compelling. Most people, not all people, but a lot of people are on LinkedIn on their desktops and tablets and laptops. And so seeing the video is perhaps more engaging, and they're maybe more likely to explore more and all that. I think a lot of people in the podcast industry, kind of shocks me, even the ones in our network, and I try to talk to them, is that you have to understand too, that when you're writing a podcast description, depending on how long it is, YouTube, they say it needs to be, a couple hundred words in order to have real value. Obviously, a couple hundred words in an Apple description is, that's lengthy, but embed your links because the links flow over.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, it's shocking. These people who we syndicate, and I'm looking at what they're doing because we're going to come in after the fact. And I say, learn more, put a link. do something, call to action, that link is valuable, right? And it's picked up by the search engines. It all gets back to, and AI too, right?
I 100% agree with that. There's so much detail.
Yeah.
You have to put the same level of effort into the content around the content, as you say, the show notes, even changing out. We haven't done this yet, but I've noticed that a lot of podcasts, particularly like sort of high profile ones like the New York Times, will create artwork for each episode.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool too.
That's cool. And again, that's an AI tool, again, all these things that used to take so much time,
Now you can just pop them out, right?
You just pop out, Got a 22-year-old intern and do that, doing their sleep. Yeah, exactly.
So where do you think this is going? What do you think the next few years look like with regard to podcasts?
Yeah, I do think that's a great question, crystal ball. And if I had the answers, and if I got them correctly, I'd probably make a lot of money, but that's unlikely. Unlikely, exactly. It's unlikely to happen. I do think that you just cannot ignore video podcasting. It's like I said, if I were going to start a podcast tomorrow, it'd be a video podcast. You just open up, your corporate video on YouTube's getting nothing, right? Your video podcast on YouTube could do something completely different, right? Understand what it is that you're trying to get across, and that higher that production value, because we are in the age of AI, the higher the production value, the better, right? And so understand that video podcasting is where that Netflix is into video podcasting. Again, now that Apple's added it, RSS feed that you can submit, that's a game changer right there. The use of AI is going to continue to make video podcast production easier and easier as we go along. As far as audio quality, visual, music, they talk about, it doesn't really impact perhaps the niche that we're in healthcare, but they talk about the immersive experience now of video podcasts, right? And so there's a lot out there that's happening. And I think that AI obviously is going to continue to get better and faster and smarter and all those kinds of things. So use that to your advantage. I think that the video podcasts that we're going to see 2 years from now are just going to be incredible production value, incredible sound value. I think that they're going to creating graphics and animation and all those kinds of things that you want to do to create that personality of the host or host of the show is going to accelerate. So, start exploring these tools now. They're super cheap.
So final question, any closing tip that you want to give people? Obviously you've said, go video, but anything else, any other closing tips?
Yeah. If you're doing a podcast today, even if you're not on video, my 2 tips. A, get your RSS feed submitted to YouTube. Even if you don't get any plays, get it submitted to YouTube. And then B, find some sort of tool that you can take that episode and cut it up and pull out all the various nuggets in it that you can then create reels, share on LinkedIn, all those kinds of things. Those teasers and trailers, which is where we're, like TV that we're really getting to from video podcasting, those teasers and trailers will do more than anything to help drive attention to what you're doing.
Carol, that's great. Thank you, Carol. I have learned so much. Honestly, I'm looking forward to reading the article I'm about to write because I'm going to put all this into practice.
I can't wait. You'll embed the podcast too. So even better, embed the video cast. Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Well, Carol, thank you.
No, thank you.
I learned so much from talking to Carol. If you want to see the article that we've created, you're going to find a link to it in the show notes. It's going to be a really actionable article on how to create your own successful podcast, or if you've got a podcast, hopefully there's some tips in there that are going to help you to really maximize the value that you're getting out of this medium. 3 key takeaways. So number 1, if you're an audio only, go video and double down on video. Takeaway number 2, leverage AI for efficiency. So there are all kinds of AI tools out there that you can use to edit video efficiently. I use Descript. It's phenomenal. But there are also all kinds of AI tools that you can use, for example, for taking the transcription and creating notes, for creating artwork, for episodes, all kinds of things like that. And then the last point is niche targeting wins. Figure out really precisely who your show is for and what value you want them to get out of it. If you want to read the article, it's down in the show notes. And by the way, if you want to book a meeting with me and sort of, if you've got something you want to talk about regarding to healthcare technology marketing, there's a link to schedule a meeting with me down below. So with that, farewell, everybody. See you on the next show.